Women. I would like to thank our senior advisor, Joaquin Clinton, for organizing these wonderful events, and also like to acknowledge our DNC Black Caucus Chair, Ms. Virgie Rollins, and Lottie Shackelford, the Women's Caucus Chair, who created this joint initiative a little bit over 3 years ago. So I want to thank you all so much for everything that you're doing. So just to discuss a few things logistically, we ask that if you have any questions, that you please utilize the chat box. If your question is going to be directed towards a certain individual, we ask that you identify who that question is for. We are going to do our best to get to the questions that are presented, but please don't take offense if we don't get to your question, but we will acknowledge and follow up with you all. So I would like to turn over this program to our amazing mistress of ceremony, Miss Danae Pointer, who is going to lead this conversation. She is a wonderful asset. It's wonderful to have a Black woman who is in our communications room. So Danae, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ebony, and welcome everybody to the third and final Seat at the Table Sister to Sister conversation hosted in collaboration with Black with No Chaser. And hi to everybody who is tuning in on Facebook. Tonight's event, From Conversation to Activation, Justice for Black Women is on the ballot, will center us on our issues in our way. Again, I'm Danae Pointer, and I'm a communication strategist in the DNC War Room, which is the rapid response team dedicated to fact-checking, research, and truth-telling about Donald Trump and his egregious and dangerous administration. As we count down, and I guess this would be a good moment to say, can everybody mute their computers? That might be you, Miss Virgie. It's okay. We can keep going. Um, as we count down to November 3rd, I wanted to share a few figures and facts from the War Room about just what's at stake in this election and provide a bit of context for this timely conversation. As you all may have seen or heard this morning, over 60 million votes have already been cast, and that's more than 40% of the total number of ballots cast in 2016. And millions more are voting every single day. This morning on Fox and Friends, Jared Kushner said that Donald Trump can't want Black people to be more successful than we want for ourselves. But in touting his policies on crime and the economy, Kushner failed to mention that as of last month, the unemployment rate for Black Americans remains in the double digits at 12.1%. Note that's 2.3 times the rate of white unemployment. Black Americans represent 33% of the sentenced prison population. That's more than any other racial group. Black women have the highest mortality rate of anybody else, dying at the rate of 3.2 times that of white mothers in childbirth. We represent 13% of the population and more than 20% of all COVID casualties. So right now, over 45,000 Black Americans have died from the coronavirus, and that number continues to spike as cases are rising in states across the country. Now, you may have heard this as well. Trump's own chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has said, "We are not going to control the pandemic." That is a quote. And tonight, the Republicans are staging another potential super spreader event at the White House to confirm Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court without the support of millions upon millions of Americans. Yesterday on 60 Minutes, Trump said, "It will be good if the Supreme Court overturns the Affordable Care Act." And that's a move that could cause 20 million Americans to lose their insurance and threaten coverage for over 133 million Americans with pre-existing conditions. Of course, Donald Trump has zero plan to replace it, and he has no plan if he were to be reelected, which is why this election is a matter of life and death, and this conversation about justice is more important than ever. So tonight, our program is hosted in partnership with the DNC Black Caucus and Women's Caucus, which Ebony already mentioned. But I am delighted to introduce our Black Caucus Chair, Virgie Rollins, to welcome everyone this evening. And I will pass the baton on to you, Ms. Virgie.
Thank you, Dana. Uh, Thank you, Joaquina, for another series of Seat at the Table. This has been awesome. These series has been very informative, and thank you so much for your leadership. It has been a joy to work with you. Well, we have 8 days left. We have less than a week. We have millions of Americans have already cast their ballots. And the DNC Black Caucus are working very hard. This past weekend, we delivered over 800 kits, toolkits around the country, educating, putting door hangers out, knocking doors, making phone calls, teaching people how to vote early. We're encouraging everybody to get out and vote early. We're confident that our position is strong heading into this home stretch because his supporters like you have helped us build a massive grassroots organization that has bolstered the work for Vice President Biden and Senator Harris. So it is imperative that we make sure we get a big seat at the table in electing Kamala as our vice president. So thank you, Joaquina, for today. Justice is on the ballot. You have put together a great group of speakers for tonight, and we're going to sit back and everybody's going to be educated and listening. And come November the 3rd, we're going to say hallelujah. And November the 4th, hopefully, if we do our part, we're going to be jumping up and down and making sure that we have elected Vice President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Thank you, guys.
Amen
Let's
to
go
that.
win.
Amen to that, Ms. Virgie. Now I am delighted to introduce Ashley Allison, who is the Coalition's Director of Biden for President, to share a few words with us. Ashley?
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Wakinya, the Black Caucus, the Women's Caucus. 8 days, whew, 8 days. Today was a long day and it's not even over yet. I am really excited about this conversation and honored to be here. I remember the first time I voted in 2000, and shortly after that, Timothy Thomas was murdered by police in Cincinnati, Ohio, my home state. And it was really where I cut my activism teeth in protesting. And I haven't really looked back since. I remember when I joined the White House in the Obama-Biden administration, it was sadly a month before Michael Brown was killed. And activists, and we brought activists in to have this conversation about justice long overdue. When we heard the statistics earlier about how many people have died from COVID, how Black women are disproportionately unemployed right now, how the justice system has failed our community, but how we have an opportunity to have a seat at the table, and a voice by voting now over the 60 million people who have already voted. I'm excited about the opportunity. The campaign has been working so hard over the last several months since the convention to make sure we're engaging Black women. We're here because we know we're the backbone of the Democratic Party. We're going to show up and show out, and we're going to make history and elect Kamala Harris, the first Black woman to be in the White House and Vice President, and Joe Biden. But we're also going to turn our families out. We're going to make sure that our communities show up, because everyone knows what's at stake this election. We had events all over the country this past week. We saw folks dancing. We had strolls to the polls, promoters having parties, concerts, so much fun, because there is joy in voting, and there will be joy on November 3rd, and there will be joy on January 20th when we inaugurate Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But we still have 8 days. So we still need you. We all need to hit the phones. We need to text. If it's safe, we need to knock doors. We need to call our friends, our families, post on social media. We have to do every single thing possible. We have already seen historical numbers. More people have voted now early than voted the whole entire early vote period in 2016. So we're on the track to make history 2 times over. We need you. We're counting on you. We love you. Joe Biden, Senator Harris appreciates everything you do, appreciates all the leadership at the DNC, and we're in partnership together. So thank you so much. Looking forward to this conversation, and let's go win, run through the finish line. 8 days left. Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. We're going to do it. Now I am delighted to introduce my friend, Democratic strategist and commentator, Donna Brazil, to share her wisdom.
Hello, can you hear me? What a great honor it is to see all of you and to be a part of this wonderful conversation. A seat at the table is not just bringing in folding chairs. It's allowing Black women and others to be able to talk about what's on the menu, to help develop the strategies, and of course, to make sure that there are more seats when we walk out the room than when we came in the room. I'm greatly honored to be here because in the final stretch of this remarkable campaign season, justice is on the ballot. We will not only elect a new president and a vice president, 2 people that I've known for so many years. I'm so excited about the prospects of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that I can't stop working. And so across America, we know that when we go to the polls, and I'm going to wait to carry my ballot into an early voting site here tomorrow in the District of Columbia, because I want to be with my neighbors, I want to be with my friends, but I also want to stand up for those who are not able to be with us this election cycle. And yes, I will be thinking about the Honorable John Lewis when I go and cast my ballot. So across the country, We know that in addition to the presidency, members of Congress, both the United States House, the Senate, 11 gubernatorial seats, there are district attorney races across the country, mayoral races, state legislative races, municipal court judges, sheriffs, people who shape how our communities are ran and managed. These are the individuals, in most cases, who will ensure public safety and secure our communities. Equal justice under the law is on the ballot. And we know when we vote, we can address racial profiling. We can discuss over policing in communities of color. We can address police violence, due process for immigrants detained by ICE. So justice is on the ballot this election cycle. The integrity of our entire democracy itself is on the ballot. Millions have been forced to stand in long lines just in order to vote. Millions of our fellow citizens. It shouldn't be this way. There's no place in our democracy for the kind of shenanigans that we continue to see each and every election cycle simply because people have the audacity to want to vote. So remember, justice is on the ballot, equal justice under the law. And yes, as Black women, we know we take this responsibility seriously. Our civic engagement will determine the outcome of this election. Our participation will help to shape a new tomorrow, a new beginning, not just for our communities, but for the United States of America. I am proud to be part of a demographic that celebrates the right to vote by voting. I am so very excited to be part of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, for the past 20 years. And I'm so proud of all of the leadership, from those who come in, well, I guess used to come in before this dangerous pandemic, but those who answer the phones, to the interns, to all of the staff directors, to all of the department heads, and to all of our councils and our caucuses, including the DNC Black Caucus. Thank you so much, Virgie, for your leadership. Thank you, all of my friends at the DNC, for your amazing, amazing hard work. I'm so proud of you. Look at me. I'm over here, sitting in a headquarters for AT&T using their free Wi-Fi, and you all are doing the Lord's work. You know that if I had an opportunity to be with you, I would be there because I love you and I appreciate all that you have done for our party and for our great country. So with that, my sisters, I'll turn over the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Donna. You're going to make us cry over here. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Well, now it's time for our seat at the table conversation. And I'm going to pass the baton to my fabulous colleagues, Wakinia Clanton, who is the senior advisor to the chairman of the DNC, Tom Perez, and Sika Noxolo, who is the director of Black with No Chaser, which is our media partner this evening. So Wakinia and Sika, on to you.
Thanks, Danae, and thank you, Ms. Virgie and Donna. I don't know why people keep trying to make me chair of the DNC, but I am not. I am the senior advisor to the chairman at the DNC. I'll leave that chairman stuff up to Donna and Tom Perez. So let's get into it. First of all, thank you, everyone, for joining us here this evening. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be with you all. The work that we're doing at the DNC in these last final days only help to support the cause of the Biden-Harris campaign. And we could not do the work at the level in which we're doing it without amazing partners. I believe that Danae mentioned earlier on this call, but more than 60 million Americans have already voted in this election. And so what that means is that we got more work to do, which is why I brought in the fabulous team at Black with No Chasers to help us further our efforts by having a conversation that centers Black women as we rightfully should. You know, I think folks have mentioned on this call that we are the backbone of this party, but we are also the backbone of this nation. Without Black women, there would be no United States of America. And I think that goes without saying. And so for tonight's conversation, we brought some heavy hitters to you to get this party started. First, I want to introduce to you two-time WNBA champion and gun safety and gender and pay equality advocate, Miss Devereaux Peters. Devereaux, join us on screen if you will. Devereaux is one of the amazing women who have partnered with us at the WNBPA to help have this conversation, to really bring the issues of Black women full circle for those of us who are often left out of the conversation. So I thank you, Devereaux and Terry and the entire team over at the WNPA for really being our partners in this work, for telling your story, to using this platform to make sure that we don't forget about the tireless work that you all are doing over there to help advance women in your profession. So thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I can't wait to talk to you a little bit more. We also have joining us for this transformative conversation, founder of the social impact firm Pink Cornrows, my dear friend, trusted sister and colleague, Miss Iffy Ike. Iffy, if you don't mind, join us on camera so that people can see your lovely face. Iffy just wrapped up an amazing week of Black policy through the third annual Black Policy Lab that was hosted virtually. And I think she had over 1,000 people join just this. I want to say the only word I really have for it is really amazing conference that really centered us in our issues. They talked about everything from Black church relationships in the Black community, to tech, to health, to essential workers, so forth and so on. I mean, it was an amazing conversation. So thank you, Iffy, for joining us today for this conversation. And then helping us to round out this evening's conversation is Dr. Kalia Harris, Dr. Kalia Harris, who is a K-12 education, racial equity, and women's rights expert at the Center for American Progress. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for joining us tonight. It's time for us to get to it. And I know you women have a lot to share on this call. And so we're excited to have your voices lifted up in this conversation. Sika, before we get into it though, is there anything that you would like to say? You know, this is our first time partnership with you. And so we're super excited to have you here as well.
Black with No Chaser is very excited to be here. This is an honor to have this conversation on our platform, and for Black women to come together to have importance of the community seeing us delve into these type of conversations. And that's exactly what Black with No Chaser is about: amplifying Black stories, amplifying Black voices, and amplifying everything that needs to be amplified for our culture to understand that we have a race that we're running, but we have a race that we're definitely gonna win. And we know that we're gonna win this, especially with Black women being the backbone of the Democratic Party. So we know that we got this, but at the end of the day, we still gotta do the work, and that we are happy to do the work because we are here to do what God sent us here to do. So let's get this conversation started, sis, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Devereaux, I think this first one's going to go to you. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, let's go. So, I know you a couple of years ago, you tragically lost your cousin, JoJo, to gun violence. And, I think it's something that far too many of us understand, having to deal with loss in such a senseless way, if I may. But you kind of took your pain and you molded it into action. You took the stress and anxiety and the hurt felt in that moment, and you channeled that into activism. And so you joined an amazing team of organizers over at Moms Demand Action, and you just really picked up the mantle to fight for gun violence in a very direct way. And so we want to say thank you for that. October, in addition to being Breast Cancer Awareness Month, it is also National Domestic Violence Awareness Month as well. And we know that disproportionately impacts Black women, right? And as we talk about that, we want to address the disparate impact that gun violence actually has on our communities and us in a very direct way. And so as an advocate against gun violence, like, what advice would you give to the voters who are heading to cast their votes
next week? Like, what would you say to them about what's really at stake in this election, and why is it so important for us to vote responsibly come November the 3rd?
Um, so that's a great question. I guess I start with, in general, gun violence impacts our community drastically. Um, and as Black women, especially, as we all know, we sit at the intersection of race and gender. And so, as it pertains to gun violence, that causes a lot of issues for us. Um, and so, um, it affects us in a bunch of different ways. It can be broken down in different ways because of that intersection. So on like the race side, we are 10 times more likely as Black Americans to be killed by gun homicide than white Americans. And then you want to add in police shootings, because police violence is gun violence as well, even though it's not always thought of that way. It's still gun violence. And then on the gender side, women are more vulnerable to gun violence. And so we see that as, on average, 52 women per month are shot and killed by an intimate partner. Mm-hmm. And then you look deeper, and you have Black women, which are 2 times more likely to be shot and killed by an intimate partner, right? And so in general, Black women are sitting in a very dangerous zone when it comes to gun violence. And then you add in, right, the pandemic right now, which is a crazy time. And it's really enhanced some of the key drivers of gun violence, one of which is being lack of access to opportunity. So you see things like job loss, housing instability, poverty, food insecurity. All of these things are root causes of gun violence, right? And they've only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And then on top of that, as you were speaking about domestic violence, we look at that angle. The pandemic is caused even more disruption in that sense, in that you have women and their partners who normally would go out in the day and go to their jobs and go about their day and be out and about. And then we have these job losses. So these women and their partners are losing their jobs. And then also we have these city shutdowns, which is all causing us to be in the house more, right? And for women that are abused, being stuck in the house with their abuser is very, very dangerous. And then if you add a gun in the house, that danger is exponentially increases. And so all of these are factors that add in to us being in the midst of issues with gun violence and the pandemic. And going back to your question about, voting, all of this comes together to right in this moment where it's extremely important that we pay attention to all of those factors when we're voting, and we make sure that we vote for gun sense candidates, because these things between the mix between the pandemic and gun violence, the way that it's devastating our community and the way that it is extremely impactful. So right now, voting for people that understand the effects on our communities and want stronger gun laws and want safer communities for us. At this point, it's really a vote for our health and well-being because of the way that it's affecting us right now. So making sure that, we really go out to the polls and find these candidates that will support stronger gun laws and support advocating for our communities being safer is extremely important right now. And if you don't know who those candidates are, you can go on gunsensevoter.org and see which candidates in your district have proven that they will support stronger gun laws, and make sure that they're on your ballot come November 4th.
You also talked a lot of, I know you, first of all, thank you for that. Thank you for that wealth of information that you share with us. But there are also some issues around pay equity that are also at stake in this election. We're looking at a Supreme Court justice nomination that could really set women back 100 years. In the anniversary year of the women's suffrage. And so, how has your work at the WNBA actually been to help further us in that movement?
I mean, that's something we're fighting for firsthand every day. Yeah, a lot of people understand the difference between what the NBA players are getting paid and what we get paid. And it's interesting how this year has panned out because a lot of what has caused, what has happened from the pandemic is really opening people's eyes to what we actually have to go through. This year, you know, a lot of players with our new player collective bargaining agreement, they got a significant pay raise and they're doing a lot better and making the steps in the right direction. But a lot of these players, you know, are playing 12 months out of the year. And they're having to work twice as hard for not even a quarter of what the men are getting. And I think it's interesting now because we have a situation where the men are introduced to situations like we are. I often say, you know, I was playing, the WNBA season goes from May to October typically. And a lot of us go play overseas after the WNBA season. That season goes from October to May. So I would often tell people I would get maybe 2 weeks off a year total in the total year. And they weren't consecutive. It was usually sporadic throughout the year. And now we see the men who just had their season end and now they're going to have to pick back up and go right back in December. And everybody's complaining about how, you know, there's going to have this wear and tear on their body and how difficult it's going to be for them. And we're like, yeah, we know, we understand that. Just having that understanding and people starting to see firsthand because we have players that won't be silent about it and aren't afraid to say this is not okay. It's not that, you know, players are asking for to be paid the way the men are, but we're asking for equity. Be paid what we're worth. Be paid for the time that we're putting in, the strain that they're putting their body through. And this is something that is consistent regardless of what field you're in. This is across the board for women. And this is something I think where by showing and speaking out against this and fighting the way that we did the last year and being able to get this new collective bargaining agreement and push the league forward. It's just really showing that you don't have to be silent about those issues, and especially with pay equity, it's something that you have to be vocal about because if other people, even at your job, don't know what you're making and what is happening, you know, in terms of them and each other, there's no way to force that envelope forward and push forward if people don't know. So I think just as a league, just showing that speaking up as a league, especially majority Black women, being able to speak up and make our voices known and actually get progress in closing that pay gap is extremely important and just shows what we can do as Black women.
Thank you so much for that, Deborah. I appreciate that. Now, Iffy, you previously did a stint on Capitol Hill in the House Judiciary Committee under the Honorable John Conyers. So you've influenced policy from mass incarceration to hate crimes to police brutality and gun violence, you name it. Since that time, there has been nationwide movements to automate the clearing of criminal records that block second chances for tens of millions of Americans. Talk about the disproportionate impact this has on Black women and our families, and what are some truths we should realize about this going into the election?
So that's a big question. So let me start with the easy
Okay.
part, which is to say thank you to Wakinya and Seat at the Table, the Democratic Coalition, Democratic Party, SICA with Black with No Chaser. I think for those of us that have been organizing for a while, it is the coalition of these different parts that is going to improve how we message to diverse communities. And we must remember that with Black women, we are a diverse community, right? That Black women experience life differently. And in this next week, when I hear about this question, I think about, I'm very excited that over 60 million people have already voted. So the real question is, who are the people in the gaps and why are they not voting, right? And there are quite a few demographics that are disproportionately disconnected from the political system, and it has to do with the generational systemic ways that misogynoir has impacted Black women. And what I love about this conversation is that it's specifically about justice for Black women. So I want to make sure I call out the Corinne Gaines and the Sandra Blands and the Breonna Taylors and the many Black women that have been both profiled and whose lives have been eradicated that cannot vote in this upcoming election, for the many issues that Devereaux has mentioned and that we were here on this call. When I think about how the justice system impacts Black women, and especially the expungement or the clearing of records as it relates to Black women, part of the reason why I get frustrated is because the criminal legal system and even African American history is not necessarily framed in an inclusive way of how Black women and all those that identify as Black women have been impacted by the criminal legal system. We can't forget that Harriet Tubman had a bounty on her head, right? So we have always been profiled, we have always been chased, we have always been a threat to the system. And in many ways, the invisibility of our issues is also part of the reason why we cannot get ahead. And so when we think about this initiative called broadly, there's an initiative called the Clean Slate Initiative, but on a very practical level, people have been talking about whether it's ban the box or questioning how the collateral consequences of incarceration. Before I was on the Hill, right before I was on the Hill, I was one of the researchers with the American Bar Association to literally go through all of the states and identify the collateral consequences of incarceration. And what's important to note is that for Black women, we continue to be one of the fastest and the highest rising groups of those individuals who are incarcerated, right? And I'll get into a little bit what offenses put us in more vulnerability, including what Devereaux had talked about as to how Black women also cannot, do not have the same success rate of using guns to protect themselves without subjecting themselves to being incarcerated, right? But we also need to recognize that we don't come out into the world as Black women. We start off as Black girls and Black children, and that we also have a disproportionate way that we are profiled and we are put into the criminal legal system very early, right? And so when I think about the ways that Black women have been impacted and why it matters in this election cycle, we should really be centering not just our own individual stories, but who are the people that we know in our network that have been impacted by the criminal legal system all the way back to the war on drugs, which we often look at as a Black male issue, but we don't talk about what it meant for Black women to be left behind in communities, right? To keep the community together, raise children, and economically be able to compete in a capitalist society. That has generational impact as to what survival looks like for Black women in the hood. I'll just keep it plain. And then we should then talk about, as we have fast forwarded to now the space where everyone's talking about diversity and inclusion and expungement and even the legalization of marijuana, we have not talked about how women not only need the same reliefs that we often attribute to Black men and boys, but women also need to be part of the entrepreneurial conversation as to what economically makes us whole and how we can actually advance with the bag. So part of the issue that I have is that we have, or not the issue, the opportunity that we have is that we have an entire group of individuals that may not be hearing either their issue or they are fatigued by always being courted based off of a criminal legal narrative that excludes them, or a narrative that doesn't necessarily give hope in an economic way that we do when we talk about African American males, or even people that have more privilege. So I put that, I know that was quite a bit that I've put out there, but I want us to know that like law and policy only becomes law and policy when people organize to push law and policy. So we have to figure out the ways that we message to women and their families about the real harm that has already happened and not ignore it and make it invisible no more. And then fast forward or get ourselves to the place where they can imagine and dream about what their future could be if these collateral consequences consequences will continue to be reduced, right? Because the pay equity conversation that Deborah had raised has a broad spectrum, whether it's individuals that are professionals at the highest form of athleticism and any type of sector you can think of, to individuals that are literally just trying to get a job but can't because 90% of employers still check background checks, right? And I just want to make sure I am inclusive of all of our Black women, including Black trans women, who disproportionately also are stopped and arrested, right, for either sex work or perceived sex work. And when you talk about what that means as far as an economy and what it means even within our own community as far as the type of bias, violence, and discrimination, that means that we also are missing an opportunity to engage individuals that right now we have legislators, we proudly have Black trans women who are legislators throughout the country, right? So we are talking about communities that are literally missing from the conversation about civic engagement, that when it comes down to which votes are going to matter, I mean, hey, regardless of how you feel about all communities and all Black women voters matter. They are the backbone, and we can no longer court Black women off of death and poverty alone. We have to start looking at what it means to recognize in this season, their essential nature in both being essential workers, but also how the WNBA, and I always uplift the WNBA, continues to be at the forefront of athletic activism and many times are not seen for that, not just now, but over the years, but also what it means for us to ensure that Black women are respected beyond the necessity of being the backbone, but also to be respected for being the future of how we actually improve society, not just being the group that has to be relied upon and also gets blamed if we don't win, right? So I want to put it out there that if we don't win, it ain't on us. So I'll end there.
That was an amazing response. I mean, you didn't lose me anywhere in there. So trust me, I followed. I hope that the audience was able to follow. And I appreciate you breaking down everything because you answered every facet of what we were actually asking. Thank you so much. So to Dr. Harris, the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention documented that Black girls are 3 times more likely to be referred to juvenile court than white girls, and 20% more likely to be detained. We know that Black girls don't necessarily misbehave more than white girls, yet in every state across the country, they are more likely to be disciplined in schools and often receive harsher penalties for the same infractions. Experts and researchers have found this to be true. So this is an opinion, this is straight facts now. As we look towards Election Day, realizing all that is at stake for our communities, what should voters know and realize about the stark differences in current administration and Biden-Harris administration as it relates to Black girls, education, and justice?
Thanks so much for having me, Sika. Thank you, Wakinya, and the Democratic National Committee. Pleasure to be here, and this is a topic I can talk about all day, 24/7 for hours. You know, I love Black women, and you can see over my shoulder, I have 3 Black daughters who will be Black women. So these issues span my lifetime and span my work, but also span my household. So extremely important for me. And when we think about the school to prison pipeline, you know, Dr. Monique Morris often talks about the school to confinement pipeline because the ways that exclusion from school shows up for our girls can sometimes be different. And so we've seen over the past decade or so a necessary focus on boys and men of color, Black boys in particular. But to add on to the statistic that you shared, Black girls are in some places 7 times more likely to be disciplined and excluded from school than their white counterparts, and 4 times more likely to be incarcerated. And they are not necessarily committing infractions at the same rate. They absolutely are at the same rate acting like young people, acting like children, and showing developmental behaviors that are in line with their age. But then you move over into the concept of confinement. When you think about pushing out Black girls because their uniforms don't fit, right? Because the ancestors blessed them with thighs, or blessed them with developing at a rate that may cause their body to look more mature, but their brain is not more mature developmentally. And so they come to school, and you have well-meaning folk, including some of our own skin folk, who say to them, you need to go home and change your clothes because your skirt is too tight or your skirt is too short. Well, an A-line khaki skirt is not going to fit everybody the same way, right? And so we do things that tell our young women that their bodies are not valuable, their images are not valuable. At the Center for American Progress, we help to craft and support Representative Ayanna Presley's School Push Out Act. And that was to allocate $2.5 billion towards identifying ways to make schools safe and supportive for all of our children, but in particular, you know, Black women, Black girls, and other girls of color. And then you go to the other extreme of the Crown Act, which was just passed by Congress in the spring, and it goes to our hair. And again, continuously being policed from the time we are children all the way through our careers. You know, I I have been wearing my hair naturally since I graduated from college. That was a long time ago, but that was at a time where I only had pink oil moisturizer and jam. And you know, I had the confidence to step into the world of work with my hair the way it grew out of my head. And then on top of that, decided to get locks and wore locks for 15 years. But too frequently, our young women are being told there's something wrong with their bodies. There's something wrong with the way they advocate and speak on their own behalves, right? So we're teaching our young people to speak up for yourself, advocate. And then our girls are in an AP class and being kicked out because they know that Christopher Columbus didn't discover anything. And so they're using their voice to go, you know, head to head with their teacher, and being told to be quiet, dim your light, stop speaking, stop being so rude and wagging your head. And they're like, I'm not wagging my head, I'm speaking the truth, right? And so we need to think about the language that we use. We need to think about the ways that our children are confined. And when it comes to this election, and we're thinking about a Trump administration, which has done a number of things. They have reversed guidance around school discipline for the US Department's Office for Civil Rights. They have reversed guidance related to Title IX and protections for transgender children. We even see them right now in different jurisdictions threatening to withhold their money, because the federal government has the power of the purse to withhold money already allocated to jurisdictions that have been trying to implement strategies to protect the civil rights of transgender children. And then the last thing I'll put out there is this administration has adopted a new commission called the 1776 Commission that is asking school districts to not only reject the 1619 project, but to go further, stop talking about critical race theory, stop talking about racism as an endemic and pandemic and systematic structure in this country. Which is anti-academic, it is anti-educational. And frankly, if they were supportive of white children, they wouldn't be doing that, because in order for all of our children to be global citizens and to have access to the franchise and to be able to meet the American dream, then white supremacy would not be being advantaged in our schools. And instead, we see white supremacy being advantaged, yet people seem to not catch that white supremacy's driver is economics. It is money. And so white supremacy is not only about making sure Black, Indigenous, and other non-Black people of color don't have what they need from the schoolhouse until they're pushed into the jailhouse. It is also about making sure white people, for the most part, don't get access to the 1%. Right? It really is about protecting wealth for a very small handful of people and convincing other people, you know, you too can have this. You too can go to the WNBA if you just practice a little harder. Well, that's true for probably less than 1% of you, right? So let's put in balance that, we see this little boy in his video that's going viral. I love him. It's the ABCs, and he talks about being a gastroenterologist and an intelligence worker and an engineer, and he goes off, right? Our kids need to understand that our elected officials are supporting them. The last thing I want to say, and I know, we've gone a while here with some good stuff, but the last thing I want to impose upon people is this election is not about November 3rd; it's about November 4th. And if we want to be taken seriously as folk who, you know, are being courted for our vote, then we need to step up on November 4th in advance of election 2024 or 2028, because the reasons we aren't engaged include people thinking that they can come around at the last minute and say, Black women, get out here and be the backbone and turn out the vote. And then on November 4th is crickets, right? Where is the School Push Out Act? Why has it not been passed yet? Or why aren't there additional resources being donated? Why hasn't the reparations bill been passed so we can examine what that might look like? Why haven't we established an infrastructure strategy or economic development strategy in the face of COVID-19 that takes into account racial injustice that we're experiencing? So November 4th is the name of the game. And if you want to spend another 4 years, that will turn into another 20 years, frankly, if we have the same president, of trying to fight for the environment and the conditions that support Black liberation, then don't vote. If you want to work towards Black liberation, then go vote. Because the fact of the matter is, Black liberation is not going to be handed to us by the federal government, by your state government, by your local government. Right? That is something we're going to have to take. And that is a tenet of critical race theory. If there is not interest convergence where white folk or the dominant culture is able to see why it's convenient for them, for you to be liberated, then it's not going to happen. So for anybody who's hoping for the next president or vice president to hand you liberation, you're going to be waiting until your deathbed. But what we do need are the conditions that will support us achieving Black liberation. And it's critical for us to think about that as we vote in November 4th and beyond.
Well, let me just be clear, because Dr. Harris, you dropped big buckets on us this evening. But I want, but I want to be clear. Election day is November the 3rd, and everyone must vote on November the 3rd.
Let me
okay,
anchor
let
that.
the record reflect. I want to be very clear for people that we voting on November the 3rd. Now, what she talked about was making sure you don't stop after that.
Before on November 3rd, before on November. So if you're in line today, won't he do it? We praise you.
Yes, hallelujah. But don't forget that the last day to vote
November 4th is when additional work begins. We need you to vote on or before November 3rd.
All right. I just want us to be clear, because
clarification.
Okay. Be clear. Be clear. But no, we appreciate you so much, Dr. Harris and Devereaux and Iffy, for your comments in this conversation. And Dr. Harris, you actually brought up a point that I want us to talk about in this forum. We've been doing Seat at the Table now at the DNC for about 2 years, and we try to make sure that it is a well-rounded conversation and we lift up every part of our community. We want to understand and also convey to others that Black people are not a monolith, nor are Black women especially. And so a big part of our community are Black trans women. And we don't talk about it enough. I think this year alone, we started this year with a number of heinous deaths committed against Black trans women in our country, and very little was said about it by the community as a whole. And so I actually want to take a little privilege and really uplift them in this space. And Sika, I know you're co-moderating, but I'm gonna throw it over to you, because this is a space that is in particularly very important to you, and you represent parts of that community specifically. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that, especially with what we're facing in the Supreme Court right now, and how a number of laws that protect Black women are being challenged with the nominee in Amy Coney Barrett. And so, we've seen what has happened with the United States Senate, and how Lindsey Graham in particular, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has rushed through somebody who is grossly and underqualified to be a justice in this country, but who will likely be confirmed to serve. Um, and I want to talk about what that could really mean for members of the LGBTQIA plus community. And so, you know all too well about the spiraling injustices and violence being waged against Black trans women. Last summer alone, we saw 6 Black trans women under the age of 32 be murdered in the span of 9 days. And their deaths were a part of like this horrifying pattern that is becoming far too common here in our country. Hate crimes against transgender and non-gender confirming people um, is on the rise. And I think we've said it over and over again. But when we think about the inequities and the prejudice against these women and that they face in the outright violence against their humanity, I mean, we've seen it everywhere from unemployment rates being at 26%. We've seen it with the disparities in housing and incomes and homelessness and just a plethora of healthcare, a plethora of issues. And with like 8 days left on the clock, right? Sika, how vital is it that people really understand the likeliness of the mistreatment of these women being kind of normalized in our country? You know, we have a candidate who supports trans panic defense, who supports the trans panic defense.
You just
And
said the key word. You just said it. Because I'm pretty sure the audience isn't even familiar with what trans panic defense is.
Mhm.
And what that is a mechanism for someone to claim insanity for their reasoning for killing someone of the transgender family. Now, this is a deep subject, and it could take a lot of time, and we're not going to take too much of your time tonight, but we have to realize that there are too many crimes that are happening in short spans of time that are taking out too many of our communities, and we cannot elect or fail to vote forcing certain people to be in position to pass certain laws like this, like the trans panic defense. If this law could be passed, then there are going to be several people that are going to be able to claim this and get off for just senselessly killing people. You cannot play God. That's first and foremost. And secondly, every life that is placed here on earth was placed by God in the first place. So no one has the power or the ability to be taking these lives off of this earth. You're hurting so many families when this happens, and you're destroying so many communities. And there's something that our community has to grow towards, learning and educating ourselves about transgender. We have to learn about all of the other sexualities outside the ones that we are familiar with, so that we can learn how to communicate and transport throughout life without being so harmful, because this is not healthy for our community, and it's not healthy to have certain people in office. It's really dangerous. It's dangerous waters if we don't pay attention to who we are electing, and it's dangerous waters if we fail to make sure that we're going out to vote for the right one that needs to be in the seat, that understands these type of things. Because I understand that this is difficult for a lot of people to understand, and it's going to take time. But as long as we are willing to put in that time, we could reach to a better understanding of each other so that we could successfully move. And we can't move successfully if we have the wrong people in office. It's going to halt everything.
No, I appreciate that so much. And I think Iffy, did you have something you wanted to add there?
I just wanted to say very quickly, because like Sika said, there are so many relationship conversations that need to happen between the ballot within our community, that are multi-layered, that are deep. One of the things that I appreciated during the Black Policy Lab with educators who spoke to young people during COVID, and many of them were young, disabled, young queer kids at this time, that were trying to inform it what policy looks like. And one of the things that they said was, number one, we can't blame COVID for certain things that are happening, right? That there were issues within our community that were here before COVID. Number two, these babies were also very clear that there's certain things that we also can't blame Trump as a community that we need to address. But number three, I want us to also recognize that from a policy, from a social, and from a legal perspective, if the only thing you get from this conversation, especially for those that are trying to get along or come along as to why it's important to protect trans Black trans women, and why this panic defense is so problematic. Even if you don't understand everything outside of the the binary male female, lens, recognize that in this country, Black women, the data shows that Black women are disproportionately misgendered anyway, that we are seen as more masculine, we are seen as less feminine, therefore that has consequences in the workplace, that has consequences in the doctor's office, that has consequences when we are getting our job, that has consequences when we are being fired from our job. And that also means that if we are putting within law enforcement and people around us the ability to basically claim that I didn't know this person was dot, 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 or to harm us based off of the perception of whether or not we are more feminine or not, however you describe that also puts Black women, cis hetero Black women also in jeopardy, because people can use that as a defense to misperceive us based off of their perceived fear. It is extremely subjective. It leaves all Black women, and I do consider Black trans women Black women that have a different woman experience, that it also puts all of us and girls in jeopardy of being profiled, harmed, and killed. And one thing about when you're killed, somebody can raise a defense, but when you're gone, you don't have a defense. So I just put that out there to ensure that it is about the preservation of life. We can debate everything later. We can bring a Bible, we can go back and forth, but we have to be clear about how more laws profile all of us and put us all in danger, and that it is about the preservation of life. And to Khalila's point, Dr. Harris's point, liberation requires bodies. And so if they're killing bodies, we don't have armies to build. And we have to see ourselves as not against each other, but against systems that put us against each other. So I just wanted to make sure we highlight that this is a threat to all of us and all of our safety.
Yes, sis. Yes.
I know, right? You just gotta just be like, okay, where do I go from here? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where we're gonna go. We have a couple of audience questions, which we actually have time for tonight. So I'm excited about this. We're gonna start with this one from, I believe this is Dr. Lisa Lyles DeLon, who asks, she said, this is for anyone on the panel, so y'all take privilege here. She says, white police are able to grow their bias towards Black people because they are not required to interact with Black people in their neighborhoods. They attempt to interact with Blacks in the neighborhoods they attempt to enforce law. When the concept of retraining police is put forward as a beginning solution to the needless violence visited upon us in our neighborhoods and hymns by police, how are those kinds of problems going to be addressed? You cannot mandate a person's bias, but we need to change their bias so that they can give us a benefit of doubt that is assumed as a right by white perpetrators or potential perpetrators. Okay, so I think ultimately what she's saying is, how do we ensure retraining the police actually works when it comes down to folks who are not from our communities but have the responsibilities of enforcing laws within our communities?
I'd love to jump in here.
Please, thank you, Dr. Harris.
So I don't remember who said it earlier, but it was about the expansion or explosion, if you will, of people who call themselves DEI experts. I don't actually like the phrase diversity, equity, inclusion, because that often means you get included into other people's reality instead of the umbrella being expanded to acknowledge your reality is valid, valuable, and necessary. So, and then diversity is the new code word for Black. The Black folks don't like this, so let's do diversity. Whatever, that I can go off on a tangent about the people who just put up a shingle and say they're equity experts when they have no background in organizational development, human psychology, or establishing change that is second order change as opposed to first order change. Here's the thing. If you think that training is going to move entire police forces to behave differently than their mission, right? The question is, what is the mission of the police? And the mission of the police is not to be racially just. That is not the mission of the police force. The mission of police is generally to protect property, number one, and to protect wealth, number two. And so when you want to talk about, what training we can impart to address implicit bias, first and foremost, a lot of these biases that we see enacted against us aren't implicit at all. They are explicit. So as long as you want to call racism implicit bias, there's a disconnect there. When you talk about training, causing people to reduce their bias, you might get a little reduction, but the mission of their work is not to provide culturally responsive approach. So when you think about, and not only white police officers, let me just say, but when you think about police officers engaging with community members in communities they don't live in, you have a problem in and of itself. When people are policing communities in which they do not live, there is no amount of training that can cause you to humanize people whose initial training was you protect property and you protect the affluent, right? And the trigger in your mind of who owns property and whose property is worth protecting is off. There's no amount of training that's going to allow you to adjust your behaviors as such. So when people talk about defunding the police, and folk want to play the game of getting wrapped up in the word abolitionism or defunding as if they don't know what we're talking about. I liken that to people who say, well, let's talk through racism. Let's make sure people are comfortable. You don't want to upset people or they're not going to be in a good conversation. Well, I've been upset since I came out the womb at Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York. I've been upset. I've been wanting to talk about it since then. Even through my baby tears, I've been wanting to talk about it. So to tell us that we need to make you comfortable to have a conversation about how your foot is on our neck, and then to say we need to train people, or we need to stop pouring money into a system that has a mission of protecting the property of others and of protecting the affluent, under the mindset that our skin color could not possibly have affluence in a system of capitalism built on white supremacy. There's a disconnect for me, because training isn't where it's at. It's moving resources to make sure that all people are included into a society that sees all people as valuable, not that we're just included into your society. So, I always push on people who talk about training, and I understand where it comes from. I understand that there are many members of our community who are either conservative or they just believe that the police are going to protect them, and have a difficulty when they are living in circumstances that have been set up to be the way they are through redlining, through predatory lending, through all of those structures, that it's hard for people day to day experiencing the vestiges of that to then say, we need fewer police, as opposed to, why isn't the school system being funded at the level that supports all of our children? Why don't we all have access to healthcare? Why was I not able to get a mortgage to go live just 10 blocks down when I can afford it? So, those things are all intertwined. If you want to get stuck on the word defund, you're stuck there because you want to be and not because you don't understand what's at stake.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Woo, child, you have a lot of amens, speak on it, sister, go girl comments that are happening over in these chat boxes. So we appreciate you for that commentary. We actually had another question. We have a couple more questions coming in, and we're going to wrap this thing up soon. Let me get it. Okay, it's coming from Yolanda Greer. She's coming in, she's tuning in from Facebook, and she wants to know, how do we slow down the pipeline to prison for our Black children? And I know, Dr. Harris, you've done extensive studies around this. Iffy, you've done work around this as well. Let's talk about it, y'all. How do we do this? How do we slow down this pipeline? I think there's another invisibility here we haven't addressed, and that is the disappearing of our Black girls, and how those young lives are lost in further conversation. And so I know that's a bucketed, a heavy subject to talk about in both of those regards. But that question came in from our Black Caucus Chair, DNC Black Caucus Chair Virgie Rollins, around the disappearing of Black girls. And then we had the one online from Yolanda Greer around how do we slow down the pipeline to prison for our Black children. So you all can take any part of that, of those two questions that you want. We got raised hand.
I'll take a very quick. I'll take it from the Joaquin, you know, I've said this many times that my daddy says that everything is a pipeline to somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about it that way, the fact that we've normalized the phrase school to prison is problematic. Mm-hmm. That alone should have been halted as soon as that became.
I'm so glad you said that.
I mean, it's frustrating. It's problematic. It is. One of my dreams as a human and civil rights attorney is to organize Black and brown mothers to literally do a mass taking out of their babies from schools. As people know, when women do that on an individual basis, they are arrested, they are prosecuted. I dare them to take all of us into jail with the stats that we know about what our babies are going through. And to be clear, discipline in prison is only one of many things that happen within our schools. In addition to killing dreams and minds, this is the most socialized program that our nation has. That no matter your socioeconomic status, you go through some type of pipeline of school, and that's powerful as to a space of disruption, right? But it's also powerful as a space of programming. So when I think about what needs to change, and I know Dr. Harris has experience on a multi-tiered level, I'll talk a little bit briefly as to, again, connected to elections and connected to why your leaders matter. When I worked in the mayor's office in New York City, I was tasked with designing a teacher recruitment strategy to basically recruit 1,000 Black and brown male teachers in a span of 3 years. Now, when I first heard it, I was like, you find me the land of melanin, because that is absolutely, in the words of Joe Biden, malarkey. Like, how, right? Because I also knew that I challenged whether or not they were open to the diversity of Blackness and Black maleness and Black educators, and wanted to be like, are we ready to train the brother that has the education degree, but also are we ready to train the barber who probably is a much more influential teacher? And so I say all this to say that when we think of disrupting our schools, to build on what Dr. Harris said, I don't want you to just only take money from spaces that profile us and put them in spaces of education. I want you to get rid of educators that don't care about us, and the ones that profile us and discipline us and have records of disciplining us and literally having babies out of the classroom for 10 days because she was sassy. If you can't teach, in the words of Biggie, don't be mad, UPS is hiring. There are other places you can be. You do not have to be in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So I think that we have to be really vigilant and angry and make sure that the platform, especially for Black women and caregivers, requires candidates to put forth a plan to make sure that we actually get rid of the school to prison pipeline within your local community. Because if we keep repeating it, then we are also basically trying to figure out how our babies avoid the school to prison pipeline while other babies get, put into the school to prison pipeline. So we actually have to be very, very clear about the history of what it meant for Brown versus Board of Education to simultaneously eradicate Black teachers from the classroom and also subject our babies, the beginning of the mass putting our babies before people that used to spit on us on our way to school, and how that has never changed. And I get passionate about this because there are also studies that show that women my age who are in this like older millennial space, many of us have chosen not to be traditional mothers, if you will, because of all the different ways that we have to ask ourselves, is it ethical even to have a child that could be profiled, that I may have to go off on a teacher on a day-to-day basis? When you think about all of those things and how it's a deterrent to how we end up being mothers that have the same protections of other mothers of different races and ethnicities, we have to think about this as the second wave, if you will, of the same impact that the war on drugs had, as an actual movement. That the school to prison pipeline is one of many extensions of COINTELPRO and all these other different ways of making sure that we fall in line and that we ourselves are dividing ourselves amongst each other. So I'm going to stop there, but I think that if we're going to talk about school to prison, we have to also talk about mass teachers that love us. It's well known that if teachers can't love you, or if they don't love your people, they can't love your babies. So we have to actually be really aggressive with who's in the classroom, who the principal is, who the superintendent is, and any elected position that's connected to education, Board of Education. We need to be on the boards. We need to be putting ourselves up as candidates, because somebody else is making a decision about your child if you're not there.
You said three important words there: aggressive, angry, and passionate. And there's one thing that America has always tried to play against us as Black women, is calling us angry Black women. But you got to understand that when it comes to our children, to our babies, we're going to be passionate, we're going to be aggressive, and we're going to be angry every single time. We're not going to lay up on that, because that is our future. That is who is going to bring forth everything that we're working for right now. And they're going to make all of that fruitful. And we can't let up. We can't let up, just like they're not letting up on our necks. And it's important that we understand that there are times where we can, rightfully so, be that angry Black woman that you want to fearfully make us, because we understand the intimidation that we bring when we are passionate about ours. And we're not going to let up on that. And we also understand that you're probably taking a couple of pages out of the ISIS papers and you're trying to use it against us. But luckily for us, we're educated enough to know when you have got a piece of our plan already. And we're going to be prepared enough to work against whatever the plan is you have against us. And I just wanted to say that, like, it's okay to be passionate. It's okay to be aggressive, and it's okay to be angry. And we have to realize that. And we don't have to step back from that at all.
Sika, I want to thank you for that, and thank you, Iffy, for offering that intense, emotional, and necessary commentary here. I also want to note a couple of things. When you talk about passion and rage and anger, they all come from the same place, and so does love, right? Those three emotions all come from the same place. It's a fireplace. If you think about the color that is related to each one of those emotions, is red. And it's because it comes from the same place, that fiery place that motivates you and moves you in a real meaningful way. I know we talked a lot about the historical context and the theoretical knowledge behind a lot of these issues, but let's get into some of the practicality. Devereaux, I know you had some things that you wanted to add from your personal experiences to be fruitful in this conversation as well.
Yeah, I say that I love what Iffy said about pulling, our children out of these schools when the teachers aren't qualified to teach us, aren't doing their jobs, because really that whole idea of the school to prison pipeline is just shown in our schools. They're not doing that. You don't see police officers or metal detectors in the white neighborhoods in their schools. And so I love what you said about that, about making a point of taking people out, because I lived for the majority of my life on the south side of Chicago, but I went to school in the suburbs, in the white Catholic. I've always gone to pretty much white Catholic private institutions my entire life. So I've seen both sides of that. And I think one thing that is important to note is that it's the perception and the idea of what Black children are, and they're criminals, and they're always causing trouble. And like you said, they're sassy and this and that. When white kids do the same thing, I grew up in white communities. They had attitudes with the teachers. They were talking back. They were doing cocaine in the alleys in high school after school. They were bum rushing the 7-Eleven across the street and stealing when they didn't need to. They're wealthy families. They have money. They're set. They're perfectly fine. I'm talking kids who I grew up with, families who had 5 children in the family, and on their 16th birthday, each of them got to go to a car lot and pick a car. But they're going to 7-Eleven stealing food. So it's not that these ideas aren't present. They're kids. They do stupid things because they're kids. And white kids do it too. They just get caught by the police and they know their dad. So they're going to bring them home and tell them not to do it anymore. And they're going to say that they need to get some help. maybe we should put them in this institution. They've been doing drugs, so we need to get them into rehab, and we need to get them access to opportunity to help, which is not what we do with our community. They see that in our community, they said they need to go to prison. They see that in our community, they say they need to be kicked out of school. So I think it just needs to be noted that these are not issues in the Black community. These things happen because children are going to be children. They're not fully developed. They don't understand these things yet, and they're going to do goofy things, as everybody does as a child. And it's in both communities. We just need to acknowledge that these are children and stop looking at Black kids as an adult and forcing them into these situations where they have to make adult decisions when they're not prepared for that, because white children don't have to do that. So I just wanted to make that point, because that's been my experience growing up in these white institutions and seeing how we're treated in Black communities and Black schools, and how my friends are treated as compared to how I was treated in these white schools. And even with me, I had a lot of privilege in myself being an athlete. So I was the Black kid that was an athlete. So that's a privilege in itself. So even my experience was very different. But I think it just needs to be noted that it's not that it's our communities doing this. They happen everywhere. It's just how we acknowledge it and how we perceive our kids as opposed to white children or children of any other race.
Wow, ladies, thank y'all. We have been joined by a very, very, very special guest. She is one of the baddest women that I know. I mean, every time I see her or read about her, I immediately think I probably should go to law school. She is a fierce and fabulous leader, joining us all the way from New York City. Attorney General Tish James is here with us this evening. Attorney General, you'll be glad to know we have a couple of Brooklynites on the call here tonight, a couple of New Yorkers in the house. But absolutely, we do want you to run for whatever you want to run for outside of this. Attorney General Tish James, we're going to turn the floor over to you. We didn't realize we had you down in the attendance pool, but now we're happy to bring you up to the panel. So please, anything you would like to offer here?
Listen, I was listening to this incredible panel. They just dropped the mic. And sometimes it's important that elected officials just listen. And so I am glad that you did not detect me in this chat room, and that I had an opportunity to listen, because I picked up these kernels of information and intelligence and just and all of this Black girl magic. And you educated me, and you brought some issues to the forefront that I had not even thought about. All of the issues that you've discussed, my office has been involved in. We're investigating a case in upstate New York where a number of little Black girls were suspended. Suspended because they do what I do, and that is shake my head when I talk or use my hands, which is just really part of who we are. And we are investigating in upstate New York and even on Long Island a number of school districts which unfortunately have suspended a number of my Black boys. Again, arguing that they were a little bit too aggressive. So all of the issues that you've discussed, including the police department and the lack of residency, is an issue that I was involved in. I was working in the state legislature when they removed that residency requirement. I'll always remember that. We're members of the Black Caucus and members of the PBA literally almost got into a fist fight in the hallway. And removing the residency requirement was a deal that was cut for something else. The Black and Puerto Rican Caucus at the time opposed removing residency. And I worked for then Assembly Member Al Van, who was the sponsor in opposition to removing residency requirement. But they cut a deal with the speaker. And as a result of that, police officers now can live in Long Island and the surrounding suburbs. There's been efforts to try to get it back, but once you get the genie out of the bottle, I doubt very seriously we're going to get it back. And we are at a defining moment in the history of our nation when we are examining and the killings and the murder of so many unarmed Black men and women. It's rekindled this flame of righteous indignation that has been smoldering for years. And what people now know is true, we've known was true for a very long time. It's just that individuals are now capturing it on their cameras and their cell phones, and they become photojournalists or citizen journalists. And so these killings are nothing new. But what we do now have across this nation is you've got 7 Black attorney generals, and we've never had that before. I am the 3rd Black woman attorney general. The second one was our next vice president. And we obviously have experienced, and we know what it is to taste racism and to taste discrimination. And someone who has been fighting that battle all of my life. And as you know, we are investigating a number of cases in the state of New York, and we are demanding justice. And we are committed to ensuring the constitutional right for individuals to protest peacefully. And that right has to be protected. And it will be protected, I can say, in the state of New York. And we are required, like my sister said, to call out and root out this systemic inequalities in policing and society that have led to the tragic deaths of so many African-American men and women. And, you know, the whole notion of defunding the police. This is an issue that we have to discuss because we've got to democratize the police. We must democratize the police, and we must put everything on the table and reorient the notion of policing and what policing means to you and I. And it's important that the voices of individuals who've been hurt the most, that they are at the table. We need fundamental change all up and down the system. And this, unfortunately, this division that we are now seeing is not going to be fixed by tweets and denials and half measures. We need a full review about what it is police currently do and a community-led evaluation of what they should be doing, especially, my friends, when it comes to mental health. Because since I've been in this office these last, 20 months, and since I've seen and reviewed all the cases involving police shootings, the vast majority of them have involved people who have been involved in the throes of mental illness, the vast majority. And police officers are just not trained to handle mental illness, as was mentioned before, because their primary mission is to protect what? What do we say? 2 things? That's right. And so we've got to examine all of it. And we know for decades, as was mentioned, again, another kernel of truth, that Black women have been the backbone of the Democratic Party. And now Black people are courting us, but they just can't court us during the election and then walk away. It just can't be every 4 years or every 2 years and walk away. It's just not enough. In order to turn our communities out in the record numbers, they must have a comprehensive agenda that includes us, that empowers us, that puts us at the front of the table and not the back. And we're not just talking about criminal justice reform, but as was mentioned before, economic justice, economic reform, healthcare, maternal. We've got to focus on maternal mortality and what that looks like. We've got to talk about environmental injustice. We've got to talk about clean air, clean water. We've lost too many children suffering from asthma who cannot breathe. We have to talk about healthcare, affordable healthcare. We've got to talk about the Supreme Court in light of Justice Barrett, who will have a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. We've got to talk about justice and say their names over and over again for Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor and so many others. We got to talk about the trans community, the Black trans community in particular, that are being killed, unfortunately, at increasing numbers, and no one is really talking about that issue at all. They need to be at the table. We've got to empower one another. We all of us. And so you guys said it all. You don't really need to hear from me. I just need to really listen. And I just need to, and we all just need to march in quiet dignity and in defiance to all that was discussed up to the ballot on November the 3rd and do our thing and have a plan and bring our sisters and bring our mothers and bring our family, but vote in quiet dignity and quiet defiance to all that is happening in this nation and demand change, and demand that we return to some normalcy in this country because we can't continue, just cannot continue. And so I thank you, my sisters. I thank you so much, and I hope that we can heal this fractured nation and that we can all come together soon and we can celebrate. God bless all of you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney General James. You have no idea how impactful your comments and your commentary and your support have been to us this evening. There are rave reviews of you in this chat box over here. Folks are really grateful to you in your service. We are grateful to you in protecting our democracy and making it true that you will pursue justice for all of us. So we appreciate you for taking it to task. For folks who are breaking laws in the state of New York, we
And
appreciate
in Washington.
And in Washington. That is absolutely correct.
All I do is wake up each and every day with a fire in my belly. I walk into the office, I sue somebody, usually somebody at Black Lives Plaza, and then I go to hell home. God bless
Yes.
you.
Well, we thank you for that. We need that. You know, there's nothing quite like Black women in the world, and we thank you for being someone who is just as committed to protecting us, and not just us, but all of us in the work that you do. We know that it is thankless. We know that it is dangerous oftentimes, but we appreciate you for your sacrifice and for your commitment to this work. There have been so many questions that have come in. People are thanking you for raising the issues around mental health. We don't talk enough about Black community trauma in our conversations. And so, you know, there are just so many things that folks want to talk about tonight, and we don't have a lot of time left on the clock for that. But this conversation doesn't end here, folks. Like, what we're going to do and what we're asking all of you all to do is help us share these messages. When we post them out and we host them on Facebook or on through YouTube links or whatever, share these messages with your friends. Like, these conversations are vital. They should not live and die in just this space, which is why we're broadcasting live into our Facebook group and events here from the DNC. We're also sharing this in the Black with No Chasers online community group as well. And, you know, we're really looking to help keep our communities educated. Dr. Harris, thank you. Iffy, thank you. Devereaux, thank you. Attorney James, thank you. Thank you to all of you for joining us here tonight for this conversation. I know people have questions about how can white allies be a part of positive change. And so I'm going to actually allow the panel to close out with that question, but also I want the panel to close out addressing how we need to make sure that we are prepared to ensure that all of our voices are heard on November the 3rd. So I'm going to actually start with you, Devereaux, and then we'll wrap with Iffy.
All right. So I guess to answer the first question, I really feel that, especially in this moment with so much going on, so much affecting the Black community, so much affecting Black women in general. And on top of that, so many Black women in particular that have been pushing these issues and advocating for these rights and for things to be changed for so long. Right now is really a time to step back and allow them to do their thing. Listen and understand what we need, but also let those that have been at the forefront of these issues well before it became the cool thing to do in this year, and that have been doing the work for years and doing the research and are well versed in it a lot more than even I am, or a lot of people that are just joining the conversation. Let them take the lead and really take the step forward, because they're the ones that know more than any of us, truly. And then as far as making sure you vote, I think especially now, I just making sure you have a plan for November 3rd. I know I voted early. I did my mail-in ballot and walked it into the, one of the ballot boxes, just because I didn't want to be outstanding in line. Just make sure you have a plan, because with the pandemic, things are a lot crazier. It's going to be a lot more difficult as they want it to be. And the lines are going to be longer. And so just make sure come November 3rd, even if you haven't started making a plan, make one today of how you're going to vote, where you're going to go. Make sure you have time if you are going to be standing in line. And if not, make sure you get your ballots in early so that they get counted, because we already know right now they're doing everything they're possible to try to silence us, because they know how powerful our voice is and how powerful our vote is. So just make sure you have a plan and that we can get things done and not have the result we had 4 years ago.
All right, so I will piggyback on Deborah and say, make sure you have a plan, make sure you have a fold-in chair, make sure you have snacks, make sure you have water, make sure you have your mask. If you can have an eye covering, have an eye covering, because that is a location where the virus is able to enter your system. You know, we are enough. We don't need anything else. Everything that we need is right in front of us when we look in the mirror. And so it's important for us to make sure we exercise the franchise, that we are taking our children to the polls, that we are registering our 16 and 17-year-olds to be ready for the next election that they are old enough for. In most states, you can at least register even if you aren't able to vote. And in some states, 16 and 17-year-olds can vote in their municipality and local elections. So let's engage our young people now. When we talk about moving out of the current version of the schools, you know, our ancestral ties across the diaspora entailed us being part of extended families that were a part of our education. And we need to move back to that, because the American structure of individualism, this fake meritocracy, this idea that you pull yourself up by the bootstraps when somebody is stealing your shoes, is never going to be for us. So it's important for us to use the entire community to educate our children, to educate one another, to support one another, have that plan to vote. Make sure you're engaged and are talking with other people about their plan, to vote before November 3rd, and also begin to have the conversation, if you haven't already, about November 4th. It is important that we are accountable to our community, We are all able to play a role in leading towards Black liberation. And the fact of the matter is, don't wait for somebody on Twitter with a bunch of followers and a blue check. I'm one of those people. Followers and a blue check doesn't mean I'm doing anything for you. We need to be accountable to people in our communities. And if people don't seem to be accountable to any community in particular, you need to ask yourself a question about whether or not you follow them, because they may be saying the right things, but not know how to get you there. It is important for you to look to your neighbors that are right next door, down the street. Like Devereaux said, there are people who have been doing this work before it was on trend, before it had a hashtag name for it. And we really need to support those folks, because other people aren't giving $1 million, $2 million grants to our folk. They're giving it to their children when they graduate from college to come up with new ideas about how to support our communities. And that can't be the way. So we need to make sure we are locking arms with one another, that we're using all of our constitutional rights, for, especially the ones in the Bill of Rights in the first 10. We need to be using all of our constitutional rights to make sure our communities are protected and supported. And we also need to make sure we have a plan to exercise this vote and get ready for November 4th until November in the next 4 years, that we are also developing and cultivating candidates that can withstand the I don't like her, I don't like him, he didn't do every single thing that I want him to do up until this point, so I can't vote for him. Or she said one thing in 1977 that rubbed the Black community the wrong way, so we can't vote for her. Nope. You want a candidate that is in your own image, support them on today, to being able to be in a position to run and to run and to run, so you know people who have your values are in office. Thank you, friends, for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, I'll be really brief because everything around voting plan and what to do before and after has already been stated. I think the only thing I would add is that the issues that I want everyone who is here and their family members to know that the issues you care about are valid before we even get to the candidates. Everything that impacts your life is valid, and that there is a connection between your body and your ballot. right? And, at any point, anyone's insensitivity about what you're going through on a day-to-day basis prevents you from going to the ballot. On behalf of our community and those that are out there, I see you, I feel you. And while I may not have been responsible, I want you to understand that I recognize it and I apologize, right? I can do that, right? Because I think what's happening is that there is always, unfortunately, heightened every 4 years, but on a day-to-day basis, there is still a yearning for people to be connected in conversation beyond voting. And there are very few studies around voting behavior, but the few that are out there, it shows that Black people have a much more commitment to being, to having people earn their vote than other communities. And whether we like it or not, that is a starting point for us to realize that the next 8 days, we have to meet people where they are. That there are people that would have voted anyway, but that there are people that need longer conversations. So I ask you to really invest in longer conversations. That if somebody says, I ain't voting for them, I want you to not walk away. And I want you to not critique on the spot. I want you to ask why. Because the conversation is really, really important and people feel like they're not being heard. And that is a real thing, right? But we have to honor that and we have to respect that. And to the points that were raised, voting doesn't solve everything. In fact, I tell people all the time, voting is not revolutionary, voting is necessary, right? And we have to participate in the necessary things, right? For us to get to the revolutionary things. So I think that I just leave you all with that. To the point about white people, when Black people get killed, white people read articles. And this is why, if you ever remember that scene in Malcolm X when that white girl had approached Malcolm X and she asked him, what is it that I can do for you? And he said nothing. It wasn't that he felt she couldn't do anything. It was the fact that he felt, I would like to think of my imagination as, one of his proud groupies. I would like to think in his imagination, he felt like if you have to ask me how to be an ally, then I have to question your understanding of equity, right? That you don't need a PhD in equity to jump in and jump rope and figure things out. Ask John Brown, right? Do your research on people that were like, I'm actually going to participate, not in allyship, but in liberation. So to the extent that you can use your privilege to bring people along, your babies are fine. You actually got to figure out how somebody else's babies are fine, right? And I do think that we have to create more spaces, or white people, but also Black people with access and privilege need to create more spaces and less speeches. So I'll end with that while we are in a hashtag territory, and there are some ways that movements can be viral. I'm going to uplift End SARS because we are also a global people, and we have to make sure that we recognize that the person in the White House has a very clear global relationship with what happens with our people in Nigeria and Haiti and Cameroon and all these other spaces. But we have to be very clear that the speeches we make or the things that we make to make ourselves feel comfortable are at the expense of somebody else's discomfort. So I just want to make sure that whoever asked that question about what we can do to bring white allies along, if you are a Black person, it is not your job to bring them along, but it is your job to be truthful if they ask. And if you are a white person, create more spaces. We don't need you to talk. Trust Black women, stand behind us, and be a shield if we need protection. But do not try to get us to be comfortable with the way you see equity. We understand equity, right? And so it's time to get behind us. Thank you all for your time.
If I could take a point of personal privilege, there's something I want to add here that I typically would have said at the top of the discussion, but I sit on the land of the Lenape people right now, and I want to pay homage to them. And we are not going to move forward if we don't acknowledge the deep injustice and inequity of the indigenous people of this nation.
That's right.
And if we are going to be talking about how we advance through Black liberation, it will not come as long as indigenous people's treaties are being violated and they're treated like the land was not and is not theirs. So typically when I start, I will thank the people who have been stewards of the land. And again, I'm presently on the land of the Lenape people. But, we can't do it, I hear Black folks saying all kinds of things that make my head spin, like those Latinx people. I'm like, I'm Latinx people. So who are you talking about? I digress on that one, but we got to do this together, but we can't start without acknowledging the people whose land this was. And that's important in all that we do, because when we talk about allyship with white folk or anybody else, if we aren't allies to people whose land on which we exist, then in some ways we are ceding any advancement or movement we could make with doubt and with the possibility for it to collapse. So I just wanted to make sure I added that.
I really needed to, I wanted to add on to what Iffy was saying, because she basically just picked my brain on that for real. But when she mentioned meeting people where they are, that is very, very important in this election right now, because this isn't a time to ask someone to meet you in the middle. This is a time to go and get whoever, wherever they are, go get them and go take them to where they need to be. This is also a time to not be selfish. And this message is for the ones that are saying, I don't want to vote. I don't like the options. This is not the time for you to be selfish. This is the time for you to eliminate yourself out of the equation and look at this as a collective effort. And this is for us all. Not only is it for us all presently, it's for us all future-wise. And if you're going to choose to be selfish in this moment, you are causing harm to us. And that's what we cannot afford. And we have to realize what we can and cannot afford in this moment. And being selfish and not meeting people where they are is going to harm us in the long run. And this is where some of us, to whom much is given, much is required. So go and do the work and go get those people that you think need to meet you in the middle. Go get them and go take them to the finish line, because we're going to need that. We're going to need that extra work. We're going to need you to be tired. We're going to need you to do whatever you feel like you can't do. We need you to do all of those things. We don't need you to think about it. We can talk about that later. We can talk about that, like you said, on November 4th. But right now, let's continue doing the work, and let's not hold back. Let's not be selfish. Let's do what we know we need to do so that we can reach to this finish line.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Sika. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Thank you, Iffy. And thank you, Devereaux again. Ms. Virgie, Janae, Ebony, Attorney General James. You all have been just exceptional this evening. I also want to point out, like, as we are having this conversation right now, as Black women are gathered, centering our issues in this conversation, the United States Senate is debating Amy Coney Barrett to send her to the United States Supreme Court. And we all know what that really means for a lot of us. I know there are a lot of people who are a part of our families who actually don't understand what her confirmation is going to mean for them, right? Today is October the 26th. On October 27th, life will change for a number of people. In a few short days after her confirmation, they will be debated. They will be hearing arguments on the Affordable Care Act. So what does that mean for the millions, the tens of millions of Americans who only have health care through the Affordable Care Act? What does that mean in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of several pandemics, but particularly the one of COVID-19? What does that mean to be without health care? And that's what we're really facing as we look at the next 8 days, really 7, right? Because in a week from a week and a day after, a week and a day from today, the polls will be closed in a number of places, and we will be seeing results come in. And so as we think about what's at stake this election, for those of us who have not voted already, I'm proud to say that I'm a Maryland voter and I have cast my vote already. I dropped it off a week ago, so I'm ahead of the curve. I'm dedicating my remaining 7 days to leaning all the way in on this election, doing whatever I can to make sure people understand what's at stake and to help us fully understand what we can do to bring this thing on home. Is our national political and organizing director at the DNC, Mathoni Wampu-Crawl, who is my sister, my friend, my soror, who is coming to join us to give people their remaining calls to action. We got 7 days left on the docket, Mathoni. It's all on you.
Thanks, sis. I'm in my kitchen, girl. I've made my Moroccan stew and some South African lamb stew for tonight.
So,
all while sisters were breaking this all the way down. So This is better than a podcast. I love, love, love everything that we heard tonight. Wakenya, you could not have ended this stronger, honestly. This series has been amazing. Devereaux Peters, thank you so much for your wisdom, for your humility. There was just so much relatability in everything that you shared tonight, and in the calls to action that all of you gave. So I'm only going to do like a quick summary of some specifics that we know are still needed, because I think that the word has been given about the why. And so I'm really going to just share like what at this juncture has to happen. One of the quick and important things that we've got to do is we still got to go door to door. We know this about our folks in particular. It is effective. And I'm not asking people to do things outside of their health and comfort zones, but for folks who are comfortable with going door to door, we know that Pennsylvania is one of our big states where we need people to help us go and canvass at the doors, talk to voters. Literally, ladies, 85% of the folks who we've been reaching at the doors are folks who we did not reach on the phones. And, you know, I watched MSNBC earlier when they were talking about the math around the states and Trump's path to victory. And they're still leaving Pennsylvania up there. It's like a could be, he might could pull this out. You heard him say it in the final debate, if anybody stayed up to hear the rest of that. But Trump was very clear about what he thinks his chances are in Pennsylvania. There's no way that he wins if we turn Democrats out. There's just, the math is not there for him. So what we have to do now is help our brothers and sisters in that state to try to get to as many people as possible. We'll send links in the follow-up to make sure folks can do that. If you are not comfortable with going to a state like Pennsylvania and some of our other battleground states, it is not the only one, then you can help us call other Democrats who have indicated that they are willing to volunteer and ask them, are they willing to go and do volunteerism in person? We have seen a lot of my team is deployed. Many of them are doing it virtually, but a couple of them are on the ground. So in places like North Carolina and in Michigan, I know we had our chairwoman, Virgie Rollins, on earlier, who herself is out in these streets doing every single thing that we need done in the state of Michigan, which is probably why it looks, you know, pretty darn decent there. But you know, that folks are out there, they are moving around. We are having safe distancing events, and they've been really successful. We were highlighting our down ballot Black women in North Carolina, where we have an opportunity, a historic opportunity, to elect a slate of down ballot statewide elected Black women. So to every single point that's been made here tonight, we have a lot to gain in this election. We have a lot to gain and a lot of bullshit to lose. So it is really, really imperative that we're a part of the data, that our numbers, we saw it in 2016, which is why we were able to cuss everybody out after that election, because we stood on top of that data about who we were and what we did, and it was real. So we are going to continue that momentum. And we need folks on the phones. There are a lot of phone banks that are happening. Whatever your tribe is, there is an umbrella for you to go and do calls with folks from the community that you want to, you know, organize with. And, you know, we're having a good time on a lot of these. The Biden campaign has done a great job of really doing some good trainings. Nobody is being put on phones or doors without training. So help us make these last 8 days the best 8-day push that we have ever given. I love that for everybody who's voted already, it just gives you more time now to tell your story and to let everybody else know exactly how easy it was for you, or how hard, but why you still stood there and did it anyway. And with that, Wakenya, I pass this back to you, sis.
You're on mute, sis. You're on
See,
mute.
yeah, I saw I had a rolling thing going and got on mute. I just want to say thank you again. Thank you, Mathoni. Thank you, Sika. Thank you, Black with No Chaser, and our amazing dynamic panel tonight. Of course, our guest speaker, our featured speaker, Attorney General Tish James. Thank you so very much. Like, thank you. I mean, like, there are other words, but I don't think anything does it justice in other than us being able to just confer our thanks to you. What you do every single day on our behalf is remarkable. You make it possible for us to go on. You are the light. You are the beacon of light that we seek when we have to do this work day in and day out. So we just wanted to say thank you publicly. And to everyone at home who are watching, there's an amazing team of Black women superstars at the DNC. You don't always get to see their faces, but let me tell you, these are the hardest working women that I know. Special thank you to Danae, who did this unexpectedly, but she answered the call. To Ebony, who's on the ground in North Carolina, Toya Deans, who is the magician behind all the work that gets done. Thank you for Mathoni for letting me borrow Toya from time to time. Elizabeth Maria Penn, who has been doing amazing work monitoring the event online for us. Milan, Patrice, Raina. Raina is my go-to for almost everything. She always answers the call. She's our DNC voter protection director who is in the throes of it all right now. So I even thank her for being able to listen in to us tonight. I purposely did not put her on the panel because I know she had a million questions to answer as it related to voter protection in our country. We've been seeing the lines growing and growing. And that could be one of two things. One, we know that voter suppression is afoot, but also voter determination is also afoot. People are determined. I saw on Twitter today where folks were waiting in line, but they were also line dancing. You know, our culture will turn any opportunity into a family reunion, and that's what people are doing. That's what folks are doing. You know, you can't take this. We understand what our not only our rights are, but also what our responsibility is to civic engagement. We understand that it goes beyond just our vote, and so I also want to thank the other powerful women at the DNC, our DNC Black Caucus Chair, Ms. Virgie Rollins, our Women's Caucus Chair, Ms. Lottie Shackelford, our DNC Black Women Officers, because we do have two of them for folks so that they know. Senator Karen Carter Peterson out of Louisiana, she is our Vice Chair over civic engagement and voter protection at the DNC, and Ms. Lorna Johnson, who is our Assistant Treasurer at the DNC. You might not always see these folks, but please trust and believe that these people are working on our behalf every single day. And it is not easy being a Black woman in leadership at the DNC by anybody's means. So, and I think that goes across the board for a Black woman in leadership anywhere. So to all the Black women leaders out there, which includes all of you, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you to Terry Jackson over at the Women's National Basketball Players Association. Thank you so much for all of your help in breaking this full circle for us. And to all of you all who are watching at home, vote. If you haven't already done it, do it, vote. We actually have people who are leaning in ways that they haven't before. They want to do this. They want to do it with us. And Sika, I think you may have had something you wanted to add. Go ahead.
I was just echoing you when you said vote. Like, this is the time. This isn't an exaggeration when we say it's the election of a lifetime, and we have to act like it.
Yes. So tonight, y'all, they've dropped so many nuggets and so many buckets here in this conversation. They dropped in links in the chat. I think there was a special message that came into us from Ludacris. He had a word for us, and he wanted me to share it with you here in this forum. And as I wait for it to load. This year, nobody's sitting down. Everybody stand up. We're gonna march to the polls. I want my voice to be heard. Get out and vote. Get out and vote. Get out and vote. Let your voice be heard. Get out and vote. Okay. All right. Can y'all hear? No.
We heard it.
You heard it. Great. So that's it.
Yeah.
Wrap up. You heard the word. It's that just that simple. It's that get out and vote. Thank y'all so much for joining us. This has been a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful partnership between the DNC Seat at the Table initiative, the Biden-Harris campaign, Sister to Sister initiative, and of course, our beautiful friends over at Black with No Chaser. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Y'all have a beautiful night, and we're out. You get 1 minute back of your time. So bye, everybody. November the 3rd. That's the last day to vote.